are going to officially start our program. Hello, everyone. My name is Mitch. I will be your behind the scenes host throughout the program. If you have any questions or comments, type them in the chat. I will keep track of those. And at the end, we'll have some time to address those. Also, this exhibit is inspired by our exhibit Numbers in Nature, a Mirror Maze, which is open at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science right now through September 19th. I have now got my information, and you can find more information on the link that I posted in the chat. And with no further ado, I'd like to turn it over to geologist Bob Raynolds. Take it away, Bob.
Well, thank you very much, Mitch. And I'm delighted to be with everybody this evening here in Denver. And I want to acknowledge Asa Erlandson is our pilot tonight. So as many of you know, this is an elaborate dance between me giving talks and Ka Chun generally flying, and this evening Asa is flying as Ka Chun is otherwise engaged. But I'm going to take you on a world tour. We're going to be seeing a lot of different places on the planet that we've selected to be art, Earth as art. And we're going to be covering many different countries, and these countries, of course, are the traditional lands of many different peoples. And many different populations and peoples have lived on these lands over the many years. It's a wonderful panoply of human geography as well as physical geography. We're going to start off trying to imagine what we think art is. And so I've been challenged by my friends and colleagues to define what art is. And of course, that's a little bit daunting. So we dipped into the literature, and we've just got a couple of artists that gave their thoughts. And here you're seeing Marc Chagall, who says that art is the unceasing effort to compete with the beauty of flowers and never succeeding. And then the next image, you'll quickly see a view from Georgia O'Keeffe. And she says that, well, art is really filling a space in beautiful ways. And that's what art means to her. And she, of course, painted lots of different flowers. And many of you are familiar with those. But we're going to be looking at a different perspective. We're going to be looking at the earth as our template. And we've got a painting by Monica Aiello, and let's see if we can see her painting. And she's a Denver-based artist, and she paints with a palette of earth colors and tones and patterns. And she says in her artist statement to the effect that painting is her way of exploration. And she uses natural landscapes as the visual vocabulary for her work. And Monica is an artist based here in Denver. And we've been delighted to have a chance to chat with her, and you'll see another one of her paintings coming up later on in our presentation. Another thing I want to show you is some subway art. And this is a set of an art that I captured on the walls of the new subway station up on 2nd Avenue in New York City. And for those of you who might have been there, it's the most recent subway that's been constructed in New York City. And if you look closely at this image, it's a curious mosaic of little pieces of glass, and it is it's hard to see exactly what it is when you see it at this scale. And this is the work of Chuck Close, and we're going to see the next picture will show you a little bit further out, and you can start to see patterns in those little fragments of glass. And then the next step out is the full view as you see it on the subway wall in the city of New York. And Chuck Close is an artist who has practiced what we might call pointillism, where he's taking individual dots or little small patterns of color and making a larger image from the very small dots. And I bring this up because we're going to see similar patterns as we look at the natural world. And then others who have painted, if you think out loud, you might think about artists like Klee and Miro and others. You know, you might think of some of the work of the people like Jackson Pollock and others who've painted surprising patterns that often have analogs in nature. And while we think about painting, let's look at another artist at work here. And I'm going to take you to Phoenix, Arizona. And this is Ruby. And Ruby was an elephant in the Phoenix Zoo. And Ruby loved colors, and Ruby loved to paint. And she was painting one day in the elephant enclosure at the Phoenix Zoo, and a big fire engine went by out the front door, and she grabbed her red paint and she painted the following image of a fire engine. Aha. So the red right in the middle is the fire engine roaring by the Phoenix Zoo. And I just wanted to share the fact that others besides us humans appreciate art, appreciate patterns. Many of you will know about the bowerbird that tries to seduce its mate using wonderful artistic displays. And of course, there's many other examples in nature of organisms creating what we might call art. And you might look at, for example, beehives and termite towers. And there's a lot of construction and a lot of careful work done by other than humans that could be considered to be art. But we're going to jump into the art as seen from above, looking at the Earth from satellite images. And we're going to be using a program called OpenSpace, and Asa is driving. And we're going to be flying around different parts of the world, looking at the ground from above. And I like to think of it as looking at the ground from different elevations. And so here we're looking at the ground from the elevation of a space station or a satellite, and we're going to gradually spiral in, and you'll see beautiful patterns. And the beautiful patterns can be seen at many different scales. And you'll see some patterns when you're very close. You'll see other patterns when you're further out. And the Earth is a wonderful artistic template. And I look at this, I say, well, that looks to me like the back of an elephant. I can see the sort of the cracks and the skin patterns of the elephant. And then as we come in, as Asa drives us in towards the ground, we're seeing what we call dendritic patterns. We might see a little road here or there. We're seeing gullies, we're seeing hills, we're seeing ridges, we're seeing all kinds of strange shapes. And then as we get really close, what do you know? But you see something right there. You might type in the chat if you think you see what you're seeing. And there's a human tendency to recognize patterns. It's called pareidolia. And the pattern that is right here reminds me of Ruby the elephant, who was painting that painting in the Phoenix Zoo. And I see in the chat, many of you are chiming in that you think you see an elephant. So that's a good thing. And it does look like Picasso, but it looked to me like an elephant. And I was charmed to find that elephant out there. Other people think it might not be an elephant. They think it might be some kind of a mouse. But that's subject to people's interpretations. As we look at this landscape, and we're in Jordan right here, we're in Yemen right here, we will look at this landscape from different points of view. So when you look at it from high up, it's all kinds of interesting drainage patterns. This is the Hadramaut region of eastern Yemen. And we're going to pop back down in and look at these beautiful river patterns, very arid ground here, the colors of browns and grays and yellows and pale grays. These are the colors of the desert. And there are little oases down in some of the valleys. People do live in those valleys. But we're going to come down in, and I'm going to ask you guys in the chat to tell me what you think you see. We're going to get something here that's, we think, quite characteristic. We've got to get in close, and it's a little bit tricky business to find it. And Ace has been practicing his navigation, and it's sometimes hard to see this thing unless you get right up on top of it. But we're going to fly into this landscape and look at the patterns. The patterns are all very beautiful, very sort of organic looking patterns. And we're going to take you down and show you something and see if it looks familiar to you. See if there's a pattern there that looks familiar. And these are relatively flat-lying sedimentary rocks. And so the different sedimentary layers have different colors. And each color is sort of a thin layer of rock that's being eroded by the desert forces of erosion, largely rainfall and wind. And we're going to focus down in on the particular place here and see if it looks like a familiar object to you guys. It's going to focus in, and we're going to get right down in there. And wonderful drainage patterns, wonderful hilltops, wonderful things. I'm getting brain tissue. People think it looks like brain tissue. It does look a little bit like brain tissue, but I want to get this object right in the middle and see if anybody can see what it might look like. I'll tell you in a moment what we think it looks like. I think people are saying it looks like an owl. They're looking into the eyes of the owl. And think about an insect that has eyes on the backs of its wings. There you go. We're getting people coming in. Yeah, okay. People are coming in with butterfly. And we thought it looked a little bit like the Luna moth. Some of you might have seen a Luna moth. And it's a beautiful pattern out in the middle of the desert in the eastern part of Yemen. So we're going to back out from Yemen, and there's wonderful other patterns to see in this area. We'll come back a little bit closer to here in a moment, but we're going to step quite a ways away over to really the the westernmost part of Afghanistan and the eastern part of Iran, an area that we call the Lut block. And I just want to share with you some dramatic images of this landscape, and we'll get in a little bit close and we'll see all kinds of curious swirly kinds of patterns. You might say it looks like toothpaste. I'm trying to see, people think it looks like salt domes. And this terrain, again, relatively low relief, but it's got a lot of very thinly bedded sedimentary rocks, and the sedimentary rocks have been strongly squished or deformed by structural or tectonic processes. And it's a place where actually the plates are pushing together here. We've got plates that are pushing from the Afghanistan side, plates are pushing from the Iran side, from the Persian Gulf area. And this region that we're looking at here has been compacted or squashed by these tectonic forces. And the sedimentary rocks have been literally bent and bowed and squished. And you're seeing many, many different layers of sedimentary rock that have been essentially plastically deformed by deformation. And Asa can fly us around here a little bit more. We've got a little bit of time here to eyeball this terrain. And I've not been here on the ground, but I've flown over relatively nearby. And there's just vast expanses of emptiness. This land between Afghanistan and Iran is relatively sparsely populated. It's a landscape that's very dry. There are no river systems to mention, and there's relatively little vegetation, and there's almost no place for people to live here. This is a very stark desert, but very, very beautiful when seen from above. And this kind of theme of looking at deserts is something we've captured several as we look around, and we're going to take you to another big desert on the eastern side of the Tarim Basin, which would be in Tibet or in China. And we're going to look at a curious feature on the ground. And I encourage you to do this at home. You can use Google Earth, and you can go to these places. Any place that we've mentioned, you can find on Google Earth. And we've got a place here. We might back out just a little tiny bit, Asa, just to see a little bit about what this looks like. And we are in the easternmost part of the Tarim Basin at a place called Lop Nor. And this, to me, has always looked like a big ear. So we've called this the Great Ear of China. And we think about Vincent van Gogh, who lost an ear. Some of you might think of the artist, and here's maybe a metaphor for his ear on the floor of the Tarim Basin. And we went and looked at this object here using the open space program a few weeks ago, and started to reconnoiter out here. And lo and behold, you won't believe this, but there's an earring on the ear that has just been installed. They've just put this turquoise earring on the ear in the desert of easternmost Tarim Basin. And it's the Great Ear of China, Lop Nor, and I think it's a lithium mine. I think they're mining the lake sediments, and they're ponding it, and they're drying out to make to concentrate lithium. But it looks to me like an earring on the bottom of the Great Ear of China. This is also one of the places where they launched their spacecraft. So you'll hear about Lop Nor in the literature that way. And if we back out, we might back out, Asa, so they can see where we are. And you'll see we've got to maybe pivot a little bit so that north is to the top. But you'll eventually see that I think we got to keep going all the way around, because that south is at the top here. But it was in the end of the Tarim Basin. Let's just pivot around, and I'll point to where it is. And Asa, you might be able to use your pointer to illustrate the very there, right, it is. So that's the Tarim Basin. It's north of the Tibetan Plateau. And you can go there on Google Earth, and you'll see the big Tibetan Plateau, and then the eastern end of the Tarim Basin is where the Lop Nor feature is, and it's a lake bed. So those are lake sediments, lakeshore sediments, and those are today, the lake sediments are producing what I anticipate we'll find out to be lithium, which is of course in high demand to make things like batteries and material for electric cars. So we're going to now leave the lake systems, and we're going to go to blown sand, sand dunes, and we're going to look at some kinds of dunes. And there's many, many different kinds of sand dunes in the world. These dunes are located in the southernmost part of Saudi Arabia, the northernmost part of Yemen. It's in the edge of the empty quarter that Wilfred Thesiger explored. And they're just marvelous patterns here. And we're going to have Asa fly us around a little bit and look at the dunes. And we're up at satellite scale right now, but we're going to come down to aircraft scale. And I'd like to emphasize, just as in the subway of New York, that at each elevation or at each distance from the surface of the Earth, you see different patterns. And each elevation offers a fascinating view of the Earth. And at some levels, you see linear stripes. At other levels, you'll recognize that the linear stripes start to be made up of individual sand dunes and different dune patterns. And again, I encourage you to do this at home. You can do this at home. You can explore the Earth from home and see features like this on using Google Earth, which is a free program. Everybody can get Google Earth. And here we're close enough that we can see some roads, and they're crossing the dunes. Somebody must have to go out there and sweep the sand off of the roads every day, because the sand is actively moving. These are the big sand dunes of the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia. And we might poke around in these dunes a little bit, looking for interesting patterns. And you'll see the road crossing. There's other places where we think we can see evidence of water having once flowed, and the dunes have just crossed everything. So the landscape today would be relatively inhospitable. In fact, Wilfred Thesiger rented camels to go out exploring out here, and it was a challenge because he wasn't supposed to be in the empty quarter. And he said, "Oh no, I'm just renting these camels to go up into the mountains." But everybody knew that he was renting desert camels, because desert camels have desert feet and mountain camels have mountain feet. And so Thesiger, who thought he was being very subtle, was actually busted by the kind of camel he was renting. And here you can see one of these river systems. It's underneath the sand dunes. So before the sand was blowing, there was a river that must have flowed here. And there's little river deposits and evidence of river erosion in this landscape. But we're going to come into something that Asa found when he was looking around in this area. And again, I'm going to ask you what it reminds you of. That's that idea of pareidolia, the fact that, in these artistic, seemingly random shaped dunes, there are patterns that can be linked to something that might be familiar. And I think we're just following this road a little bit to get to the place that Asa is trying to take us. And there's wonderful sights on all sides and at all scales. It's really just a wonderfully beautiful place. And somewhere out here is a very curious pattern. And we'll just enjoy the views here as we drive along this road. Of course, seeing things you wouldn't be able to see if you were driving on the road. You'd just be seeing sand dunes out the window. But we've got somewhere out here, maybe.
It may have flown away, Bob. It was supposed to be another moth, but I think it flew away.
It might have flown away. I was just going to say that it could have flapped its wings and flown. But you can almost choose any place on this landscape and find beautiful things. And so we might just nip down and look at some of those things at the top of the screen just to get a view of what they look like in higher resolution. And again, you're getting the interplay here of the sand is blowing across the surface, and then the underlying materials, which of course are geological materials. They'd be little fluvial systems or river systems of different colors and different textures. And any one of these scenes, you could almost grab it and frame it and put it on your wall. It's one of the fabulous features of the planet that we live on. is that we have this magnificent array of patterns and textures and colors that really make up art. And of course, everyone's definition of art is individual, but this idea of patterns and shapes, some kind of a flaming view there in the middle, wild dragons on all sides, spots and eyeballs, fur, feathers, who knows what we're seeing. And someone saw a frog, someone saw another butterfly like a mask, and really you could spend a lot of time out here finding patterns that are familiar. And we've got another set of dunes that we're going to go over to inspect here in just a moment that will remind us of a famous artist. And let me see if you can think of the artist that I'm thinking of. So we're going to go to another set of dunes, and they will let's see, this is dune. These dunes, which are going to come into focus, have a very regular pattern to them, and you can again look at them at different elevations. We're not far from the previous site. We're still in the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia, but as you look at these dunes, I see these recurring shapes and forms. I see them changing bit by bit as you move across the field of view. And I'm looking in the chat to see people clamoring to say who they think this reminds them of, a famous artist. And the chat is it's clamoring. You've all got him. So this is MC Escher. And I think we can quickly flash an Escher view for those of you who might not quite remember what we're talking about. But Escher was famous for drawing these patterns that evolved from one form into another. And he did fish and birds. He did many other kinds of features. And I think as I look at these dunes, I, like many of you in the group, recognized MC Escher's hand in guiding the dune fields of Arabia. A pretty remarkable guy to be able to do that. And we're having people asking about colors, and the colors are a little bit subjective because the different satellites are gathering color at different spectra lengths. As we move out, let's see if we can see a fingerprint here. So as we move out, and the colors change as you look at different satellite systems. And of course, the open space system, like Google Earth, actually is using different imaging devices, which probably are sensitive to different wavelengths. But here you can see where we are. This is Oman, and we're in the empty quarter looking at these dunes. And I would really encourage you guys to, when you're home, take a look at the world. The world is full of these most magnificent things, and they're startling things. And I was mentioned by Mitch that we found more features than we can show you. We had to trim the program, and there's a lot of material lying on the cutting room floor at my feet, being chewed on by my wonderful dog here, that we are not able to show you guys. But those are views from the empty quarter of the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia. And we're going to now hop across the Atlantic Ocean, and we might do it by flying quickly, but we're going to go to the coast of Brazil and look at some more sand dunes. So here's fingerprint scale, and then we're zapping across. And this is a series of coastal dunes on the shore of Brazil. We'll show you where in just a moment, but I want to have Asa bring you in close here. And we've had quite a bit of discussion in the team about what we're looking at here, but I'm quite convinced that I'm looking at belly dancers tangoing. This is Brazil. They do the tango, and they do belly dancers. And I see, yes, the people in the chat are seeing belly dancers. Yes, yes. So these are the belly dancers of Brazil, and they're doing some kind of a marvelous tango. And again, you can see the white sand that is blowing in the wind is superimposed on an underlying tapestry of form that is coming from earlier geological features. I see that these are really kissing bunnies. So the okay, but there's a competition in the chat about whether they're actually bunnies or belly dancers. So the wonderful thing is that you can choose your own thought, and everybody's right. So you can see the dunes spread on to quite a distance, and these are right on the coast of Brazil. We'll eventually pull ourselves up. And so you can see sort of where we are on the coast of Brazil. Quite a remarkable feature. You know, I think of Brazil as being the Amazon River. I think of it as being big metropolitan cities, but there's a relatively small dune field here on the coast with the winds blowing, presumably from the sea, blowing the sand up off the coast onto the coastline and creating this dune field. And if we look down on it, we'll see that we're just south of a big estuary there. And if we move further out, it might be, let me just see if I can make that into the Amazon River, which I think I can. And so, well, maybe I can't. No, to correct that, not the Amazon River. And so it's sand being carried from the river systems, which would include the Amazon and its allies, and it's being transported by longshore drift along the coast of Brazil, and then it's hitting this one particular place where it blows up onto the shore. So wonderful thing, there it is, the little white thing fading away from view. And we're going to look at some more blue ground, sort of capturing this beautiful blue of the Atlantic Ocean. And we're going to go up to another blue area that's closer to home, and it's the Bahamas. And we're going to look and see what the Bahamas look like, and absolutely fantastic views from above. You can see them coming in just south of the Florida Peninsula, north of the island of Cuba. And there's a variety of islands in here in the Bahamas. And there's some very dramatic differences in water depth, which are being shown by the different densities of blue. The darker blue is the deeper water. The lighter blue is the shallower water. And I just wanted to show you the edge of the blue hole, where you've got these wonderful ribbons and curtains of oolite shoals. And oolites are little grains of sand that are spherical. And these are oolitic sands and other carbonate sands that are washing across this landscape, being moved by submarine currents. And so you saw the effects of wind currents giving the sand dunes in the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia and on the coast of Brazil. And here you're seeing the effect of ocean currents moving the sand. And it's creating, again, a myriad of patterns that are different depending on which scale you're looking at. And you can see different features as you change scales. It's a fabulous array. And again, Asa and I've looked at this quite a bit, and you could go almost anywhere here and grab a scene that would be suitable for framing. We call that frigible. A frame here could be frigible. And the concept of frigibility comes from my teaching over at the Colorado School of Mines, where I endeavored to have the students produce frigible products. And of course, a frigible product is one that you would send home and your parents would put it on the refrigerator with magnets. So we're gonna leave the Bahamas, but still stay at sea. And we're gonna make a big jump from the Atlantic Ocean over into the Southern Pacific Ocean. And that circular feature that you saw there, the blue hole, is going to be mirrored by the circular pattern that we find here in the South Pacific. And this is one of a big series of circular reefs that are located in the Southwest Pacific. And these are atolls. And some of you will remember that Darwin traveled through this area on the voyage of the Beagle. And he looked at these atolls, and was one of the first geologists to examine them. And he correctly interpreted that each of these circular reef structures is the trace of a sunken volcano. And the reefs were growing around the volcano, and the volcano subsided and sank into the Pacific Ocean. And the reefs, which have the capacity to build up because they're grading and they're constructive, they're literally growing. The reef structures are growing above the sunken volcanic centers. And they're not individual. If you look through the South Pacific, we'll take a peek up at the horizon here in a moment, and you can see that there's a lot of atolls, and they've got little oolite shoals inside them, little breaks where you can get your boat inside. Many of these are completely uninhabited, but they go on and on. There's strings of atolls, and Thor Heyerdahl wrote about them. And you can visit them if you go to places like Tahiti and Bora Bora. So I would encourage you, if you possibly ever have a chance, to visit these atolls. I have not yet been to these atolls, but it's a place that I would love to someday go to. And then the circular patterns that we saw both in the blue hole and in the atolls, we were thinking of a wonderful circle that we can show you, and we're going to share another circle that's in a different part of the world. And in a moment, we're going to scoot over to a different circle, but you can see the variety of shapes, and there's just the infinite variety. And of course, they would make a wonderful place to take a vacation. If you get a chance to head to Tahiti, who would resist that? But here's one that you might go to, and this is on the North Island of New Zealand, and this is Mount Egmont. And you might imagine it's a volcano, and there's a park system, and I think they selected an elevation contour or a certain distance from the summit of the volcano to define the park boundary. And it's created a boundary that's really man-made around this fringe of this volcano, where the agriculture stops and the forest is allowed to grow without being cut down. So it's a beautiful combination here of natural topography, giving you the volcanic edifice, a stratovolcano, and then the surrounding fringe, which would be the park system, again on the North Island of New Zealand. And we're going to leave New Zealand here in a moment, and you could pull back out, Asa, so they see sort of where they are in New Zealand. You'll see the North Island and the South Island. This is on the, I think, the southwestern part of the North Island, and it's a beautiful spot. And there we've got the southern island coming into view. So there's the two islands of New Zealand. So if you get to New Zealand, it's not too far from Wellington. You can get to Mount Egmont. But we're going to come closer to home, because these patterns that we're finding on Earth are not just in faraway places. They're not just in the deserts of Arabia or the deserts of the Tarim Basin. They're beautiful patterns right here at home. And we're going to zoom our way down towards a place that all of you can get to, those of you who are in the Colorado area. And interesting patterns. We're coming down, we're sort of at airplane view, and we're going to come down to balloon level as we get in closer to these. And at first they look sort of mysterious, but you'll see some very regular patterns, very systematic patterns. And as Asa reveals the landscape to us, maybe with a little bit of an oblique shot here, we're going to see that these patterns are quite extensive. And this is an area that is very close to one of our favorite national parks, a place that many of you have probably been to. And we're going to visit several spots in this vicinity. These are fractures in sandstones, and you can sort of tour around this area, and the area, right, you might pivot us around, Asa, so we can see how widespread this pattern is. And there's a variety of trends that are dictated by the way the Earth has broken. This is a relatively homogeneous sandstone, probably the Navajo sandstone or one of its allies, a Jurassic windblown sandstone. And those are fractures, and we're very close to Arches National Park. So we're in the area that's between Arches National Park and Green River, Utah. So ground that will be familiar to some of you. And we're going to come back here in a few minutes. We'll have a chance to see a little bit more of this area that's very near the town of Moab. But we're going to sort of key off the red colors here and find another red place on the surface of the Earth that was irresistible to us, even as we were trying to thin our repertoire. But we couldn't deny you the opportunity to come to East Africa and come into areas that I work in a lot. This is in the Rift Valley of East Africa, and the pinkness is going to start to pucker up and focus here. And we're actually at Lake Magadi in Kenya, and this is a magnificent place with this very strange salt crusts and salt accumulations. And here you're seeing a variety of different textures and colors. And Ace is going to fly around for a couple minutes here just to sort of savor the variety of surface features that you can see looking at this Rift Valley Lake. It's in southwestern Kenya, not far from Lake Natron, which also has similar patterns. And some of the red colors, people are asking what makes the red color red. And certainly some of it is brine shrimp. And it might be that there's a kind of algae in there as well that's giving it the red color. So the color is coming from biology, the red color, and the white material is salty material, salts of various kinds. And some of those salts are mined in Lake Magadi. And there's a big salt mining plant. It's a potash-rich salt. And there's quite an astonishing facility that I visited a few years ago. And the salt, actually, it's very dry, as you can imagine, but the little bit of humidity in the potash processing plant allowed the salt that's in the air. Of course, the stuff's blowing in the air all over the place. It forms stalactites. It forms big webs. And you walk into this building where there's grinding and cooking and baking and processing going on. And there are these great sort of the fringes of salty material hanging from all the rafters. It's an extraordinary spot. And you can drive there from Nairobi, and they offer a tour at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was a wonderful experience. But coming at it from above, you see things that you never see on the ground. And these patterns must have been out there in the lake when I was there on the lake shore, but I didn't see them. I was admiring the geology and admiring features that I could see on the edge of the rift system. The faults are very active. It's a wonderful place to visit, but it's astonishing to see it from above. And again, one of these features where the regularity of the pattern would please Escher. The changes in patterns across a field of view are fun to observe. And then you could grab a hunk of this and make it into, textiles. This could be, pillowcases. This could be curtains. There's just a wonderful variety of things here to see. So I'm getting the question about is the red color poisonous algae, and I don't think it was never told to me that it was poisonous. Of course, we weren't drinking the water, which would be impossible to imagine. But it was not considered hazardous, although I'm not sure how closely the hazard evaluation had been evaluated. And it probably is somewhat similar to what we call red tide. So some of you in the chat are contemplating whether this is something we might have an analog to, which would be the algal blooms associated with, for example, red tides. Now, we're going to be making a transition here. We're right on schedule. We're going to be making a transition. And Asa, you might find a nice level where it sort of gets crispier. You might back out a teensy skosh and see if it crispies up a little bit. But we're going to transition to look at patterns that are visible from Earth space that are made by people. And we're going to start out in a place that's very familiar to me because I've worked here a lot in Bolivia. And when you first look at it at this scale, you might see drainages or rivers. You might see what you might think of as agriculture. But if we back out a little bit, it's a very unusual pattern. And this is a place where about 15 years ago, Evo Morales, who was running Bolivia, did a land reform process, and he put an Adam and Eve at the center of each of these star patterns, right at the center of the star. And I'm saying Adam and Eve a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but he put a small settlement, which included a little duca or store, a bodega, and a farmer, a couple of farmers, and then they subdivided the land into 10-degree slices, and they created these star farms. And it's a very unusual pattern. We're located near Santa Cruz on the Andean Foreland Basin in Bolivia. And Santa Cruz is going to come into view on the lower left-hand side of the screen as we back out here. And this is a landscape that only 20 or 30 years ago was almost unsettled. There's been massive changes in the land use patterns here in the last 20 years. Santa Cruz is the big gray blob on the left-hand side of the image. You might drag your cursor over right there. That's the city of Santa Cruz, one of the most beautiful places in South America, with a series of circular roads and with a cathedral right in the middle. And you sit at the cathedral on the grounds, and someone's playing a guitar. And then when you think nothing can get better, suddenly a guy comes by and sells you coffee in a little coffee cart. So I encourage, if you have a chance to go to Santa Cruz, go to Santa Cruz. And then the star farms, you'd have to fly in a little airplane to be able to see them nicely. But farming is something that it's caught our eye. We see other farms, and we're going to hop across the Atlantic to Egypt and look at farms in Egypt. And it's, again, a big hop, and the colors change a lot, but you'll see a commonality here. You'll see people are out there on the landscape establishing patterns, and the patterns are, sufficiently organized that they are pleasing to the viewer. Here we're in really the Sahara Desert. This is the so-called Western Desert of Egypt. We're west of the Nile River, and we're in the middle of a very, very arid place. And the land here is being irrigated, and the water is coming from groundwater. This would be the Nubian aquifer. They're pumping water from below ground, which is going to be a motif we'll see a couple more times. And whether it's really sustainable or not, I don't really know, but there are lots of groundwater resources underneath the Sahara Desert, and they've been capitalized on by Libya, and here being capitalized on by Egypt. And often retired military personnel in Egypt will be given land grant. And I think it's a little bit of a challenge to say, well, you're going to go out into the Western Desert and you're going to establish an agricultural center. But many people are doing it, and you can see the patterns are quite interesting. And this is a place where, again, they're interesting at multiple scales. You can get in close and you'll see like Pac-Man. You stay far out, you see like a dot matrix printer we were talking about. And right here, actually, there's a big airport coming into view. So I think a lot of people probably get here by flying, and there's quite a large air facility here in the desert. You'll see the runways, and I think they've actually got some Air Force planes here because they seem to have bunkers and things organized. But it's in the Western Desert of Egypt, and again, the hand of many, many people. This is, these are engineers and farmers that are developing these amazing landscapes in resource and developing resources in places that are very inhospitable. So this is some of the features associated with the runways there. And I think that probably inside each of those little bunkers, there's probably some kind of a fancy jet, but they're ready to do whatever needs to be done to protect Egypt. And so this is a piece of Egypt that we don't see when we travel to Egypt. We typically see the Nile River and the wonderful archaeological records around the Nile, but here you are out in the desert, and people are living and people are doing wonderful things, creating food, growing food using groundwater, and creating amazing patterns that are certainly artistic. And we're going to hop over to another place. Now we're going to be back to South America and see another pattern that is on the landscape. And you see it from above, and you might say, well, it's some kind of a curious, network of webby roads and things. And this turns out to be oil and gas production. And we're in Argentina, one of the larger oil and gas fields in Argentina. And the landscape is relatively uniform and low relief, and the wells are spaced relatively evenly, and each well has what we call a pad. And so these are places where engineers have gone out and figured out the optimum spacing, or the how far apart to put the wells. And I do not know enough about it to know if the wells are vertical or exactly what the technology is. Somebody in the chat might tell me about this, but this is a vast area of Argentina down in the Pantanal area, where you can see a very systematic pattern. And again, people have been active on the landscape and have created quite an interesting arrangement. And of course, we can see the same thing in parts of the United States. We've done this in southwestern Wyoming, in North Dakota, and of course in the Texas region, and in parts of the Wattenberg field here in the Denver area. The visibility is a little bit different because of the contrast between the well pads and the background. So this is a place where they're particularly clear to see. And we have people in the chat saying that it reminds them of memory banks in computers, and sort of, systematic patterns associated with data storage. And yes, indeed, it's a sort of a fractal kind of pattern there. We're going to continue our migration, and we're actually going to bring ourselves back to the United States, and we're going to come up to the southwestern US and look at a pattern in the southwestern US that is fun to see. And again, one that you can get to, this is one that you can get to yourself. This is near Moab, and some of you might be familiar with this. They mine potassium chloride in Moab, and they solution mine it. They pump water down into the potassium-rich salts. It dissolves. The salt water comes up through the wellbore, and they dry it out in these drying pans that are very near Dead Horse Point, which is just south of Moab. And our friend Monica Aiello, who is the artist based in Denver, has used these patterns in some of her paintings. And we're just going to show you one of her paintings here. And this is Monica's view of these pans. And she's used a little bit of artistic license to modify the shape a little bit, but the form is still completely recognizable. And the tendency for those blues to be there and the river to be there, and then the reddish and brown colors of the desert, the high desert, are visible as well. So just a wonderful reinforcement of the fact that what the patterns that we see from space are actually the elements of art that in this case Monica has incorporated directly into her work. An absolutely wonderful thing. We're going to leave the Moab area. We might just, Asa, you might just show them where Moab is, just so that people know how close you are. If that's the Colorado River, if you go north along the Colorado River, just a little bit further, right there is Moab, right there. I think that you just went by it. Yeah, it's that little green valley just to the right of your cursor, down lower. That's Arches. That's the Colorado River coming down from Grand Junction, and Moab has just went off this bottom of the screen. So this is a country that you can all get to. You can visit it in a day's drive from Denver. There's places to stay there along the Colorado River. This is the Dewey Bridge area on the right, going down towards Moab on the left. And there's some irrigated ground in there that is really wonderful. I think they have apple orchards in there. It's beautiful to see. And the Denver Museum runs river trips on the Colorado River here. So if you come on our museum river trips, you get in a canoe and you canoe right by these apple orchards. A very wonderful place. But we've got a couple more places to visit, a few more minutes to go, and we're going to make a quick hop to look at some more man-made structures that are really quite elaborate. And some of you will recognize these. We're going to be, we've crossed the Atlantic Ocean, we've crossed the Arabian Peninsula, and we're going to come into focus over the Persian Gulf. And we're going to see some very interesting patterns. We're going to start in relatively close as the computer catches up with our quick flight across the face of the earth. And I'm going to ask you sort of what you think you're seeing here. And it'll come into high enough resolution. I think you can see what you're seeing. Let's see if it says in the chat what people are seeing. They haven't quite figured out what it is yet. There you go. People are starting to recognize where it is. Someone has been there. And you're seeing individual houses and apartments, and they're on a shoreline. And the shoreline is a very curious shape. And yep, people are seeing it. People have been there. These are the Palm Islands of Dubai. We're right near the Dubai airport. And you can see a really astonishing shape. Some of the most astonishing patterns that people have made on the face of the earth are here in the shallow waters of the Persian Gulf offshore Dubai. And you can see the shape of the world there on the right. You can see the Palm Island in the middle and another Palm Island under construction on the left. And it's a wonderful, wonderful testimony to the engineering skills of the Emirati people as they build these magnificent structures out into the Persian Gulf. So an absolutely wonderful thing to see. And while we're here, one of the last views we're going to take is we're going to go back over to Jordan, which is just a little bit to the west. And we're going to see an unusual pattern in the desert. And this is going to be something that's quite curious. And you can see the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, the Straits of Bab al-Mandab there, separating Ethiopia and Djibouti from Arabia. There's the northern end of the Red Sea. And you've got the Gulf of Aqaba, the Gulf of Suez, the Sinai Peninsula. And we're going to be coming in right on the border, really, between Saudi Arabia and Jordan. And we are going to be looking for a particular feature. Yeah, it has to go to the left. So we auto jumped to the right spot, and we're close in here. And I'm going to ask you sort of what it looks like or what you think you're seeing. And this is a super mysterious place. And I was looking at Google Earth, actually, and my son was working in Jordan. And so I was looking around on Google Earth, and I found this very bizarre place. And we actually went out to visit it. So we drove out from Amman. We rented a car and drove out into the desert to get to this place to see what on earth was going on. And it's a pattern that is highly unusual. I've never seen anything like it. And the closer we got, the more unlikely it was that we were going to see anything wet or green, because we were in the desert area, completely desert. And it's not far from Wadi Rum, for those of you who might have been to southern Jordan, not too far from Petra. But this is water out in the desert. And the more we looked at it, the more surprising it was. There was a great big fence around it. We couldn't get inside, but we could look over the fence, and we climbed up a mountain to look down on it from the side. And some goat guys were there. The boys that herd goats were there. And they told us about it. They said, well, this is a place that's inside the fence, and the people work in there, and they're working for an Emirati prince. And the Emirati prince is married to a Jordanian royalty, one of the daughters of the kings of Jordan. And this is a palace and an associated wetlands that have been created in the deserts of Jordan. And there's a palace there at the bottom of your screen. That's the palace. We might just eyeball the palace. And there's a heliport somewhere. I think everybody arrives by helicopter. And the palace is up on a hilltop where they've planted olive trees. And then you overlook this beautiful landscape, and it's designed in part as a duck farm. And ducks are flying in across from Africa to Europe, and they land on these ponds. And the people go out there and go duck hunting in the middle of the desert, using groundwater to make this terraformed feature, which is a startling fact, but an amazing place. And it's just startling because it's so different from everything around it. And the patterns, of course, are artificial. They've been made by people, and they're pumping the water up to create wetlands, and it's groundwater. So it's a finite resource, but it's being put into these ponds and creating papyrus swamps. And quite an astonishing feature. But it illustrates the capacity of people to modify landscapes and use resources. And of course, they are growing, they're growing organic material here and creating ecosystems for migrant birds. So it's an interesting phenomenon. And then as we back out, we're really sort of coming towards the end of our program here, but I want to comment a little bit more about the fact that people are active agents of change. You'll see some center pivot irrigation going on in that area of Jordan. Those are man-made features. They're pumping groundwater to irrigate crops. And there's a lot of places on the world's surface. As you look from space, you'll see the modified landforms. And we're going to show you one of the more dramatic ones in China. So we're going to leave the Jordan and Saudi Arabia, and we're going to be landing in what's called the Loess Plateau. It's a little bit west of Beijing, for those of you who might have been there. And there's a huge landscape in the area of the Yellow River that has been manipulated by people and literally manipulated. And we'll back out a scotch here, Asa, and so you'll sort of see these features catch on. And the ground here is relatively soft, but it's been carved by generations of farmers to make terraces. And there's a vast area of the Loess Plateau that has been converted from very rugged ground into landscape that can be farmed. And I visited this place a few years ago, not exactly this spot, but near here. And they were talking about planting trees on the flat ground that they'd made. So the man-made flat ground is growing crops and also trees. And the Chinese people are very interested in stabilizing the ground here because the wind blows the loess across into Beijing. And part of the air problems that they have, the air quality problems that they have in Beijing, is associated with the wind-blown silt that is coming off of the Loess Plateau. And so Loess means wind-blown silt. It's a German word. But you can see that the people are modifying the landscape, and they will plant trees. And the Chinese are very industrious about these. And there'll come a time when you'll look at these terraces and you'll see them to be covered by trees. So the land is changing, the people are changing the land, and it's happening all around the world in different ways and in different patterns. And we can now sort of draw to a close. It's about 5 minutes before 8. And we have what we call a soft close here, where we're going to open it up for questions and answers or comments. We might look in the chat and come up with some questions if you have some. And Asa is going to take us back to North America. We're going to leave China, and you can see the complicated pattern of the Loess patterns all around this area. The Yellow River is there, full of sediment being eroded off of the Loess Plateau and carried down into the South China Sea. And if I get oriented, I'll point out Beijing, but Beijing's going to be on the upper right, just there. So in the upper right of the scene, as we just left it, is right about there. That's correct. Good. That's Beijing. So you can picture the challenge of keeping the Gobi Desert and its associated drylands from blowing into Beijing is one of the big challenges of the Chinese people, and they're working on it very hard. It's an astonishing phenomenon. So we've got a couple of things coming. Mitch is putting a questionnaire in the chat if anybody would like to do that. It's courtesy of the people that have helped us put together this open space program. We're going to be looking at the Earth at night here for a little bit as we answer questions. And it's going to be a little bit freeform. So if you need to head out, please feel free to head out. But if you want to stay with us for a little bit longer, we've got the Earth at night. And then Asa and I, we have to confess that one of our spots that ended up on the cutting room floor was so good, and it was tied to such a nice painting, that we're going to show it as an encore. So after we finish the Q&A, there's going to be this overwhelming cry from the crowd that we have an encore, and we've got one little spot stockpiled for you that we'll show in just about 4 or 5 minutes. But Mitch, maybe if you've seen any questions, you could read them off or tell us what we need to do next.
Well, one question that it's going to be hard to remember exactly what you were talking about, but we got a lot of questions about what caused many of the different colors that we saw as we were flying around the entire world.
Well, and I said a little bit about that. I think the colors, I'll say that one thing, that the colors are both geological and biological. So the geological colors would be a lot of the browns and some of the reds and the gray colors. And then a lot of those stripes are from geological patterns where the rock layers have different colors. But then if you look at sort of the reds from Lake Magadi, and then some of the green patterns that we saw in the agricultural areas, of course, that's plants of one kind and another. And whether it's algae or whether it's actually, alfalfa or grass growing, there's different kinds of organic materials that produce the colors. So a lot of the colors that we're seeing as we look at the patterns on the Earth's surface are the interplay between the substrate, which would be the rocks, and then the surface vegetation cover.
Very cool, very cool. And yeah, as Bob said, we understand it's a school night. So if anyone needs to leave, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you had a great time. We had a great time. I had a great time. And if you'd like to stick around, Bob and Asa can answer some of your questions. If you have any questions about anything you saw tonight, or anything you think Bob might have a good story about. People are clamoring for the encore, as you predicted. And just really quick, I'm going to put up a little slide here. We want to thank some of the some of we used quite a few paintings, as you know, and we want to credit those artists. And of course, Ruby the elephant. Thank you for Ruby for letting us use your painting. When we get this. And if you have any questions, please pop them in. I'm wondering about colors. Are there any colors that are very rare on the surface of the earth?
That's a good question. We have, we have some of the rare colors right here in near us. If we go to Yellowstone, some of you have been to Grand Prismatic Spring, for example, astonishing colors. And again, due to biology. So if you look at the hot springs in Yellowstone, which I hope many of you have a chance to visit, you'll see an astonishing array of different colors, and they're caused by different kinds of extremophile bacteria and other kinds of organisms that are able to live in the super hot waters up at Yellowstone. So those are some of the features that we do see. And I think that, as a geologist, I see colors at different scales. And I have to stress that again, that like that mustache in the subway in New York, if you look at a mineral, you might be looking at something like rhodochrosite, which has fabulous red colors. You might be looking at turquoise, which has fabulous blue colors. And then if you back out and if you look at the rock, you might say, well, there's a rock that has rhodochrosite in it, or a rock that has some turquoise in it, and it will be either reddish or bluish. But then if you stand even further back, you'll see that the entire ridge or the mountainside of the mountain might be colored. And those of you who live in Colorado, you might have seen Red Mountain. There's probably multiple red mountains in Colorado. But if you drive south from Ouray in the Silverton area, in the north of Durango, in the San Juan Mountains, you'll see a lot of very reddish features. So colors are astonishingly varied across the face of the earth, and again, at different scales.
Very cool. People are wondering, where is Ka Chun? And don't worry, everyone. Ka Chun is still part of the project and we'll be back next time. But shout out to Asa for doing an excellent job flying tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a wonderful tour, and this was one of the more challenging digital Earths, those of you can appreciate, because it was a whole series of different places. Normally we're sort of following a theme or a pattern, but here we were hopping across the world searching for Luna moths. Who would have thought? And our next program is going to be in September. We've got September 22nd. We're going to be doing a digital Earth. In the fall, we're doing Changing Colorado. We've got we're talking about water resources. We're talking about fire. We're talking about climate. And we've got a series of 3 digital Earths and probably associated digital Earth academies that'll be coming up starting in September. So I invite you to come to, oh, look at this. He's finding the Grand Prismatic Spring in Yellowstone National Park, which is in Wyoming. And again, maybe a day and a half drive from here. And it is a little bit tricky to find this thing, but you're very close to it, Asa. And that's it. I think it's right there. It just doesn't. I think it's there. It doesn't show up right there. Center, middle, go in. Yes, it's subtle, but keep going and it'll get better. I think that's the right place. If not, it's very close to the right place. And let's just see if it pops into focus. It maybe wasn't popping into focus, and it might not be quite the right place. But there are a series of, as you might know, a series of these hot spring localities in Yellowstone, and the Grand Prismatic Spring is a feature of one of them. There's also a Morning Glory Pool. We're not far from Old Faithful, and it's maybe the next white place to the north or somewhere. It's near the road, but let's try that one. We'll try one more hot spring area here in Yellowstone.
One of these hot springs is it.
and then we've got to go to our encore because they're still clamoring in the chat.
Yeah, and we have one other question. Do you know of any landmarks that look like a dragon?
Well, I think a dragon, actually I saw some dragons over there in the sand dunes back when we were in the sand dunes. So my answer for that is, of course, yes. And a dragon is a little bit hard to define. Everybody sees dragons a little bit differently. And so I would encourage people in the audience to go to Google Earth and to go to the Arabian Peninsula and to see if you can find a dragon. And I predict that you'll find several dragons? So the answer is yes.
All right, so the Arabian Peninsula on Google Earth is where the
But-
dragons are.
But here we've left the Tetons, we're leaving Idaho, and we're going to go up to the North Slope of Alaska for our encore. And we just wanted to show you some very interesting patterns that are present up here in northern Alaska. Again, a little bit hard to get to, but if you get to Fairbanks, you can hop on the road, the haulage road that goes up to the North Slope, and you can get up into this country. So we're going to be looking. This is the Yukon Delta. We want to find the lakes, I think, up on the North Slope. So my feeling is you want to move up to the right and up to the North Slope, or a place where there's lots of interesting lakes. And the lake patterns here are curious, and many people have speculated about what gives the lakes their shape. We're just north of the Yukon Delta, and the lake systems up here are seemingly regular. There's all kinds of curious subcircular lakes, some of them almost completely circular, and you can make almost any pattern you want. And we've spent a lot of time looking at this landscape, and it's one of these very bizarre landscapes at different scales. And it's a place here in the United States and Alaska, so we wanted to feature some more American features. And this is ground that is, of course, permafrost and tundra, and it develops these extraordinary, curious patterns. And we might just get in a little bit closer in some place where there's nice lakes. And then we've got a piece of art that it reminded our artistic curators, which I think was Ka Chun, of a particular piece of art. So we're going to see the pattern and then the painting. And this is Gustav Klimt. And you see those vertical rectangles, they reminded us of the lakes. And this painting is fascinating because the more you look at the painting, the more you see. And so it's one of these features like the mustache. This is called the kiss. And the more you look at the painting, the more you'll see the maiden in the embrace of the guy. And it's a little bit of an abstract rendition, but nature provides us similar abstract visions. So as we end our show this evening, we want to thank all of you for coming very much. We appreciate your presence. And this program will be put onto a recording and available later. So if your friends want to see it, you can come to the YouTube channel from the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And we invite all of you to come to the museum. We're open. Displays are on display at the museum. The patterns and colors and nature's colors and patterns are on display right now. And we hope to see you sometime soon in Denver. So thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Asa. Thank you, Ka Chun. Thank you, everybody, for putting this together. A lot of people working on this in the background. We sure appreciate your help.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.